Hello, and welcome to Health is the Key, the podcast that explores the health and wellness issues that matter to 1199 SEIU healthcare workers. I'm your host, Elizabeth Moore. As summer winds down and back-to-school season begins, August also marks National Immunization Awareness Month, a reminder of the powerful role vaccines play in protecting our health. In fact, a recent study showed that over the past 50 years, vaccination programs have prevented nearly 154 million deaths from 14 different diseases. So we're happy to be joined today by Dr. Rebecca Choudhury, an infectious disease physician and assistant professor of medicine at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai. Dr. Choudhury will explain how vaccines work, review their safety, and even tackle a few common myths along the way. Welcome to Health is the Key, Dr. Choudhury.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm happy to be here to talk about this extremely important topic.
So we want to start with the basics. How exactly do vaccines work?
Sure. Vaccines are a tool that we use to help train our immune systems to recognize and respond to certain infections so that if we are, to encounter them out in the world, we're prepared and we can, respond more effectively than if we're being, infected with them for the first time. There are lots of different types of vaccines that are out there these days. So live attenuated vaccines are vaccines that actually contain a whole living pathogen, in this case, virus. All the live attenuated vaccines are antiviral vaccines. Mm-hmm. So it's a real virus, but it is a form of the virus that has been modified so that it's very weak, weak enough that it doesn't cause true illness in the vast majority of people, at least those with normal, healthy immune systems. So this includes vaccines like the chickenpox vaccine, and also the MMR, that is measles, mumps, and rubella combined vaccine. A really good thing about live attenuated vaccines is because it is a whole living version of the virus, they produce some of the strongest and most long-lasting immunity of any of the vaccine types. But of course, the downside is that because it does contain real live virus, there is a very slight but non-zero chance that they can actually make you sick. There are lots of other types of vaccines as well. We have inactivated vaccines, which contain a whole virus, but it's dead, so it can't make you sick. Probably the best, most common example of an inactivated vaccine is the influenza vaccine. We also have a category of vaccines that contain just parts of viruses or bacteria, something that it's easy for the immune system to target and detect. These are called conjugated vaccines, recombinant vaccines. This includes things like the pneumonia vaccine. Mm-hmm.
Is there an advantage of active versus inactivated, or does it depend on which disease you're immunizing against?
That's a good question. Like I mentioned before, live attenuated vaccines produce really, really long-lasting immunity, for many, many decades. Most of these vaccines, don't require booster doses, but they have the trade-off that they can actually make people ill, and they're not safe for use in certain people. Whereas the other vaccines that either contain dead organisms or just pieces can't make you ill, and they do produce good immunity, but it might not be quite as good. And, the process of vaccine development is really long and complex. It takes many, many years, decades in many cases. And part of that is figuring out which form of vaccine is the one that is able to provide the strongest protective benefit with kind of the lowest possible safety risks.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to ask you, you had mentioned the influenza vaccine. It changes every year. Can you explain why it changes every year?
Yeah, so the structure of the influenza virus is such that it can very easily kind of rearrange itself to, very trickily, like swap out this protein, put in a different protein, on the outside covering so that it can evade our immune system's response. And so each year, scientists in charge of, the flu vaccine development and production very carefully study different environmental patterns. They also study what influenza viruses are affecting people in the opposite hemisphere. So flu season is right now in the southern hemisphere. And so we are watching which strains of flu are spreading there so that we can then predict which are the ones we are most likely to see come this fall and winter and produce a vaccine which should be effective against those viruses. This process isn't perfect. Some years the prediction is more accurate than others. It's a very complex process, and that's one of the things that makes influenza a little bit tough to vaccinate against.
Right. And so often you hear, I never get the flu shot, and then the one year I get it, I get the flu. So I think throughout our conversation, we're going to bust a few myths. Is that a myth that when people say, the flu vaccine gave me the flu?
So I would say to say the flu vaccine gave you the flu is certainly a myth. There are lots of different viruses other than influenza that can cause flu-like illnesses. Some people might have a stronger immune response than others. For some people, the protection might last a little bit longer than others. It is possible, for you to get the influenza vaccine and still get flu in the flu season, either because it's a different strain of flu than the one that was predicted, or because for whatever reason you just didn't respond as strongly to that year's iteration of the flu vaccine. However, even in these cases, vaccination has been shown to significantly decrease the severity of your illness, the severity of your symptoms if you do get infected. So it's still worth doing. Partial protection is better than having no protection at all.
And I liked what you had said. So it is training your body. It's getting your body ready to fight off an infection. What gets going in your body that starts fighting an infection?
Yeah. So you could think of our immune system as having kind of two tiers or sort of two phases of how we fight off infections. So kind of the first initial response when your body encounters a virus, a bacteria, some kind of pathogen, is what we call the innate immunity. It is very broad. It's very blunt. You could think of it as kind of like the hammer of your immune system. It's a response that's always going to be triggered. Then we have a second, more precise tier of immunity. This is the scalpel, if you will, which is the adaptive immune system. So this is an immune response that is tailored to specific pathogens. So what happens after you survive an infection or after you get a vaccine? We're trying to mimic what happens in our body after we actually get infected with a pathogen. Is that specialized types of white blood cells called memory T cells and memory B cells go into a dormant state. They're kind of living in your body for years, even decades at a time, just sort of there, not really doing anything. But when and if you were ever exposed to that same infection again, they kick into high gear. They start to multiply themselves and they start to direct your body's immune response. So that it's going to be much more efficient, much faster than if you were being exposed to that pathogen for the very first time.
And you had spoken about immunocompromised people. So do vaccines work on immunocompromised people, or is there another way to protect them against disease?
So certainly, like I mentioned before, there are certain types of vaccines that immunocompromised people can't receive at all. But even for vaccines, which is the majority of vaccines, while they're perfectly safe for people with immunocompromising conditions to receive, they may not work as well. That being said, vaccination is still recommended because these are also people who are at the absolute highest risk of becoming severely ill if they get infected. And like I said before, even partial protection, some degree of protection, is better than nothing. Another way that we help protect these people is those of us who can safely receive vaccines and who respond well to vaccines. By getting vaccinated, we help protect not only ourselves, but people who maybe can't get vaccinated or who the vaccine doesn't work as well. This is, a lot of people talk about this concept of herd immunity. This is basically the state where enough people in a given population have immunity to a particular infection, that infection can't really spread in that community. It might not be entirely gone, but it's present in the population in such very, very low numbers that it's really unlikely for people, even those very vulnerable people, to actually encounter it and become ill from it.
Mm-hmm. And that was something that we emphasized, that getting vaccinated isn't just protecting you, it's protecting your family, your coworkers, your community.
Absolutely. And for those of us who work in healthcare, I feel it is especially important, to protect ourselves from all the different types of bugs, that we encounter every day, to protect our families, and friends. We don't want to bring anything to them from work, and to protect our patients and their families as well. We don't want to expose them to anything that we might carry in from the outside.
I wanted to ask about side effects. Now, are side effects actual side effects, or are they the mimicking aspects of the disease?
That's a really good question. So there are certain side effects or certain symptoms that are really, really common to experience after vaccination, any type of vaccination. They are side effects, but they're not a sign of anything bad or dangerous. It's just kind of the natural result of that immune response. So it's pretty common to get, for example, like pain or soreness wherever you get the vaccine. You might even notice like a little bump or a welt just from like local inflammation, not anything dangerous. I mentioned before, those kind of non-specific symptoms of like immune system activation, fevers, chills, body aches, etc. It is possible, to have an allergic reaction to certain vaccine components. And, that's why it's important, when you get a vaccine, to keep your healthcare provider, notified if you're experiencing any symptoms, particularly things that are not seeming to just kind of go away within a day or two. We are provoking an immune response. And so there can be certain types of autoimmune side effects, I guess you could say, that can be triggered by certain types of vaccines. These are very, very rare, but they do happen. I think an important thing to keep in mind about these effects is that they can also be provoked by getting the infection itself. And actually, you are much more likely to develop those types of side effects if you actually get influenza or if you actually get SARS-CoV-2/COVID-19 than if you get the vaccine.
And I wanted to ask you about boosters. You were talking about boosters. Why do some vaccines require boosters and others do not?
So we talked about like memory T and B cells. A vaccine is not as, it does not, produce as long-lasting that immunologic memory response as a true infection does. And we're trying our best to mimic it. We can't get it 100% right. A live attenuated vaccine is the closest to a real infection. And so these are vaccines like chickenpox, MMR, very, very rarely, if ever, require boosters because the immunity that they tend to induce lasts for such a long time, many decades. Other vaccines, responding to a dead vaccine, it's not as good as if your immune system were training on the real thing. And so what we see is that our immune memory fades over time. For some, it can be really fast, within a few to several months. Others, it might be years before we see that immune memory kind of start to wane.
And it's interesting that there are schedules for different categories of people, like babies, seniors. Can you just run through some of the must-have vaccines for each group and when to expect to get them?
Sure. So when we think about vaccinations that are given to infants, newborns, very, very young children, these are primarily going to be for pathogens that are particularly dangerous, to that group. So things like rotavirus, also, for example, or also hepatitis B virus, which while it is not immediately life-threatening, it can cause chronic infections, which can lead to cirrhosis and liver cancer later in life. Even though very young babies may not have the type of strong immune system that helps them to develop long-lasting immunity from these vaccines. The goal is just to protect them for that early, like very vulnerable period of life. Once children get a little bit older, this is when we start vaccinating against types of infections that tend to circulate a lot in more community settings. Things like chickenpox, measles, mumps, and rubella. And then once we get into like adolescents and teens, things like HPV, Neisseria, meningococcus, Neisseria meningitidis, which is a cause of, potentially cause of severe meningitis, become more important as well. When we're in kind of our middle phase of life, this is when we are kind of the most protected against various types of infections. And that's why, aside from seasonal vaccines like flu or COVID, there are not a whole lot of recommendations for the majority of like younger adults and adults into middle age. Mm-hmm. It's as we get older and our immune system starts to slow down a little bit, like, a lot of other parts of our health, that we start to become more vulnerable again. And this is why for older adults, we recommend things like vaccinations against shingles, pneumonia, RSV, for example.
And I wanted to ask about the shingles vaccine. Is that if you're immunized against chickenpox, do you still need the shingles vaccine? Or is it if you had chickenpox as a child, you need the shingles vaccine?
Good question. So we recommend the shingles vaccine for all adults aged 50 and older. And this is because, if you have chickenpox, that is, puts you at the highest risk of developing shingles later in life. So chickenpox and shingles are caused by the same virus, varicella zoster. When you become infected with it, usually as a child, the virus is kind of living in your peripheral nerves in a dormant state, and it can reactivate and cause that painful rash that is shingles. So having had chickenpox is the highest risk factor for developing shingles later in life. But actually, because the varicella vaccine contains live attenuated virus, people who were vaccinated can also potentially get it, although it's less likely. For reasons that are complicated and not entirely clear, the age of 50 seems to be that tipping point when the prevalence or the risk of developing shingles in, the general healthy population really skyrockets. The shingles vaccine is not 100% effective at preventing shingles, but it is extremely good.
And I wanted to go back a little bit. So are babies born with an immune system?
We are born with an immune system. This is assuming, a normal, healthy infant. There are obviously many different types of immunocompromising conditions you can be born with. But assuming a normal, healthy infant, yes, they do have an immune system. It is not nearly as strong as it will be, even a year after they're born. And so this is part of the reason why, on the one hand, it does mean that, a vaccine that you give a newborn is not going to give them long-lasting, lifelong immunity. But it is still necessary because even that just little bit of a boost can help protect them for even a short window of time. And it also seems to kind of prime the pump, so to speak, so that even when they get their routine vaccinations when they're a little bit older, those vaccinations will be a little bit more effective. Because even that weak immune response is enough for your memory cells to be like, oh yeah, okay, I kind of remember this thing. And so they get a little bit more benefit.
Is there a difference in response to vaccines between men and women, older and younger? What are the factors that influence how you react to a vaccine?
Sure. I mean, there are definitely a lot of different factors about us, our medical conditions, our lifestyle that can potentially impact the effectiveness of vaccines. I mean, age is definitely the biggest one. We know that very young children and also older adults are going to respond less robustly to a given vaccine than, say, a healthy 30-year-old would if you were to give them the same dose. Studies have shown that for a host of complex reasons, Women tend to have a more robust response to most vaccines than men do.
I was surprised to hear that.
Yes. Now, this is not enough that it's not enough that it's so significant that like there's no point in men getting vaccines. It's a modest difference, but it is a difference. Certain chronic medical conditions can affect your ability to react to vaccines. So we know people that with, for example, diabetes, severe chronic kidney disease and chronic liver disease may have a somewhat muted response to certain vaccines compared to the general population. And a lot of other things, smoking cigarettes, drinking alcohol, chronic stress, that's a hard one to avoid, can have a somewhat of a dampening effect on your body's ability to respond to vaccines.
And there's a lot of questioning about vaccinations now out in the world. And are there any common myths that you come up against in your practice that you're every day fighting?
Oh, yes. Okay. There are so many. One that you will hear very commonly is that, vaccines contain all these poisons, all these toxins that are dangerous to us. In particular, people will express concern about aluminum, which is added to some vaccines as an adjuvant, that is to kind of boost your immune response, or thimerosal, which is a preservative that's used in some vaccines. So first of all, substances like aluminum, thimerosal, they're not used in all vaccines, just some. And even vaccines that do contain these components, they contain such tiny amounts that there have been very carefully studied to show, that there's no danger to us from them. Pretty much every substance there is, if you take it in a sufficiently large quantity, will poison you. I mean, salt is a great example of this, right? Salt is delicious. It's also a great preservative, like one of the oldest preservatives in human civilization. If you take a large enough amount of salt, it will poison you and you will die. But we don't think of salt as being a dangerous substance for us to consume in a safe quantity. When I was talking about the different types of vaccines earlier, one that I did not get to is mRNA vaccines, which of course have been a very hot topic in recent years with the COVID pandemic. They are not as new, I think, though, as a lot of people think. So various types of mRNA vaccines have actually been in development since 1989. And we actually have a lot of long-term safety data about their use because of this. They don't even contain the actual pieces of the virus or bacteria. They are just kind of a little template, which has the cells of your body produce that protein. And then it triggers the immune response against it. They're getting a lot of buzz right now and a lot of investigation because due to the fact that you don't have to actually produce any virus or bacteria to then kill and use in the vaccine, they can be produced a whole lot faster than traditional vaccines, which makes them ideal for, say, pandemic response. All that just to say, people think, okay, this vaccine contains mRNA. My body makes mRNA. And so if I get an mRNA vaccine, it's going to change my DNA in some way. Okay, that is not the case. So mRNA vaccines, they are not able to integrate into your genome in any sort of way.
That's really reassuring to hear. Well, you've given us a lot of information about vaccines as we enter August's National Immunization Awareness Month. What could you leave with our members, the most important takeaway?
I think, there are so many different things that we do to keep ourselves healthy, right? So much health maintenance, whether that's, watching what we eat, trying our best to get good quality sleep, to get the exercise that we need, going to our routine medical checkups, right, to make sure that everything is in good shape. Vaccines we should think of as not something special, not like a annoying obligation that I have to do to check a box a couple times a year. This is a really important part of our own health maintenance. It's one of, the best ways that you can keep yourself healthy, your patients, your coworkers, your friends and family. It really is an individual benefit and individual responsibility, but that benefits the whole wider community as well.
That's impressive. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We really enjoyed learning everything about vaccines.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Tune in to our August keynote to hear Dr. Choudhury explain the rigorous approval process vaccines go through before they reach your doctor's office. For more information on what you heard today, as well as links to trusted vaccination resources, visit our show notes. And remember, subscribe to Health is the Key wherever you get your podcasts. This podcast and its content are presented solely for general informational and entertainment purposes. The information and opinions provided on this podcast are not intended as legal or medical advice and do not constitute or serve as a substitute for professional medical or psychological treatment, diagnosis, therapy, or other types of professional intervention.